All right, navigating with tracks, tips and tricks. That's going to be the second part. So we already covered in the first video what tracks are, some basic terminology, how to get tracks from the internet or an email to your computer, to Garmin Basecamp, and into your GPS. And now we're going to talk about how to set up your GPS to best suit following tracks. And I like to call this section optimizing your display. And that's what you're going to be looking at when you're out there in the woods and you're chasing these tracks and you're doing a backcountry discovery route or at the Touratech rally or something like that. So the things that we're going to talk about too, they're all on the GPS side of it. And we're focusing on the Garmin units just because, as I mentioned before, Garmin has the biggest footprint for this type of use in GPS. But if you're using a cell phone app or maybe a Trailtech or something like that, the things that we're adjusting, you should be able to adjust on any of those. These are kind of fundamental settings that if your unit doesn't give you these options, you should probably find a better unit unless it's defaulting to the right ones. But I've yet to come across any of them that don't give you all these options. The first one's going to be map view, and you're going to spend the most of the time looking at the map. And you have three different views, generally speaking. The first one, we're going to start at the bottom right. And this is the automotive view or the 3D view. Depending on the unit, the terminology can change. And this is what a lot of your automotive GPS units, a lot of the cell phone apps, and even a lot of the GPSs default to. And it's because it's really easy. It's that video game view. You have that sort of 3D fake horizon, stuff further away, smaller. And it's comfortable, but the problem is you don't have real scale. It's not like looking at an actual map where an inch close to you, an inch far away from you are the same thing. So it's great if you're just doing turn-by-turn instructions. If you say, just take me to this address, it works well for that. I still use it a lot of time. If I'm leaving Seattle and I say, take me to Moab, and I'm in the van, a lot of times I'll use this view. A lot of times this view will have some auto zoom, so you're doing 70 down the highway, it zooms out. When you come up on an exit and you're slowing down, it zooms in. But a lot of times it's hard to turn off that auto zoom if you can even do that. And if you're following a track, being so far back in the screen, if you miss a turn, the whole track disappears. Where some of the top-down views, you're centered up. So it has its place, it's easy to use, and it's great, I think, for just doing turn-by-turn navigation. Like I said, I use this still a lot of the time if I'm especially in the car and I'm just typing in an address and take me there. But it is not ideal for riding tracks or following tracks and doing backcountry type navigation. The next one, if we move over to the left-hand side, is going to be track up. And a lot of times when people go, North Up just didn't give me enough information, I want some more, I want a real scale, they'll go over and do track up because up is always forward. And it's easy. That's nice. You do get the real scale. You get, you're a little bit forward on the screen, so you see a little bit more behind you. But the problem with track up is you have to look at that little cardinal arrow in the corner again to see where north is. And it's real easy to get turned around and lose track of what direction you're going. You can leave camp and you do a couple S-turns, and somebody said, what direction is camp? And you're just down that road I just came down. Well, what direction is that? What direction are you looking right now? And you don't know. So it gives you a lot more information than the 3D or the automotive view, but it's still, in my opinion, kind of bush league. And, with all of us here at Touratech, we're going to be running the North Up, and you start getting lost and you're running track up, we're probably going to bust your chops a little bit for maybe not running the best mode that you can. And top center, and the reason why I put it top center, is North Up. And you'll see there is no cardinal arrow where north is because north is up. In this case, I'm facing south, and that is the hardest thing when you're doing a North Up display is you might be going south. And if you're going south and the screen shows you're going right or going left, you're going to be making a right turn to do that. And the way that I've found to get around this, and it just even makes you more situationally aware, is besides the fact that if you're heading down, you're going south, you also start thinking, instead of thinking up, down, left, right, which are completely arbitrary or just based on your path of travel, and your map's spinning around you, your map's going to be fixed. and you're heading south and you're thinking, you see a line going to the left, you're going, I'm heading south, I need to go west. And if you start thinking in those cardinal directions, making those turns is a lot easier. And then, if you're slowly meandering in a circle, you'll notice that, well, I was going north and then I started going east and I started going south and now I'm going, west, and then I started going north again. Did I just do a big circle? And you're a lot more aware of the big picture. The other advantage, especially if you're not just chasing a track, maybe you're navigating with a track, but you're trying to get somewhere, or you're using that in reference with a map. When you grab a map, nobody picks up a map and holds it upside down. You hold it with north up. That's why every map is designed. And if you have a north up display, you can hold up the map and it's going to line up pretty easily somewhere on there. You got to figure out where you are on the map, but then when you look at it, everything's going to line up. So north up is the way that I recommend navigating with tracks. It can be there's a little bit of a learning curve, especially when you're heading south, but you're going to have a much better picture of where you're going. Not just, I'm following the line, but you stop and you've been following a track and you stop and someone covers your GPS and says what direction were you heading. You're going to know roughly. You might say east and you're heading southeast or something like that, but you're going to know your rough cardinal directions and you're going to know roughly where you're heading. And it keeps a much bigger awareness of what you're doing. So I recommend, if you're not comfortable with it, actually spend some time with it and learn it. Like I said, track up is easy, but a couple of turns after you leave camp, you don't know where camp is anymore. Where with north up, generally you go, yeah, well, I was heading west, and then we dipped south a little bit, so I guess it's kind of, well, maybe east-ish of us, northeast-ish of us. So those are the three views. They all have their place, but north up, if you're navigating tracks, is the one that I recommend. That's one all of us at Touratech run, and anybody that spends a lot of time in the backcountry, that I've come across, runs north up, because you just have much better awareness of where you are. So you have the three options. Experiment with them, but north up, I would put in that little bit of extra effort and get comfortable with it and use it, especially for backcountry navigation. Next thing we're going to have is track color. And when you're selecting the track, and we'll show this on the unit-specific videos for how to show a track on your GPS, you have the option of selecting your color. And we have a couple of different examples here, and we got the yellow down at the bottom right. We got a purple over on the bottom left. We got a white top right, which is extremely hard to see even on the Topo map, and then the red on the top left-hand side. And some of the track color that's going to be ideal for you will depend on your maps. So there are some colors that, if you're running City Navigator, are going to pop a lot more than they do on Topo. White, I don't think is going to work well at all unless you're on the water, and then I think it's going to work really great if you're doing boating stuff and you just have that white line on the blue. I think that would probably contrast nicely. But you see on the Topo maps, even not bouncing around on the road and probably on a bigger display than what your GPS is, it's kind of hard to see. I normally default to using a red. That purple works pretty good too. I think there's an orange that a lot of the units have that can work well. And just find something that's going to contrast well against your map. And if you're running multiple tracks, it's normally a good idea, if you're running the backcountry discovery route and you have the main route and then the alternate both shown on your map at the same time, pick a different color. So when you come to that intersection, you don't go, I have two, it forks in the road and I have two red lines. A lot of times, if the main one, I'm using red, the alternate, maybe I'll use yellow or purple or orange. So when I come to that intersection, I can make that decision. Do I want to follow that? Or, okay, I know I'm going to take the alternate route, so when I see the purple, I'm going to take that turn. So it's good to know that the colors, they are changeable. You want to find contrast. On the older Zumo units, the 660, the Zumo 665, and the BMW Nav 4, regardless of what color they were in the computer, they're always going to show up as black on your GPS unit by default, and it's a weird thing that Garmin did, so you're going to probably want to go back and change them, because there's a lot of black on your GPS display already, so it's not going to contrast well, and you're going to have a hard time following it. Another thing to keep in mind if you're at the Touratech rally, we use a modified kind of skiing system. So the easy tracks are going to be green, the intermediates are blue, and the hards are red. And green is hard to follow on a lot of especially with the topo map. So you're going to want to change that. We do it that way, so when you're selecting your track and it pops up initially, you'll see that, if you're a beginner rider with street tires and you're selecting something and it pops up red, it's kind of danger, and maybe that's not the one you want to do. And it just makes it a little bit easier when you're kind of selecting the tracks. But it is selectable on the GPS unit itself, and just make sure it contrasts well so you can follow it. And a lot of the time when you're standing up off-road, you're just taking quick glances at it, so you really want it to pop like that red or that purple does. The next one is going to be maps. And in North America, there's going to be pretty much, or in the United States at least, there's going to be pretty much 3 maps that you're going to use. There's City Navigator, which is what all the Zumo units are going to come with. And I generally recommend running even if you have a Montana, or at least having on there for some applications. And there's going to be 24K topo and 100K topo. In other countries, the scale of the topo maps are going to vary, just because if they're using the metric system, they're going to use whatever the standard for the paper maps is. So in the United States, 24K topo is 1 foot equals 24,000 feet, and 100K topo is 1 foot equals 100,000 feet. So if you translate that back over to a USGS map, an area map would be 100K topo, and then a quadrant map, which is going to be a finer detail, is the 24K topo. And when it comes to the GPS maps themselves, the big difference is the 100K topo is not routable. So it's going to show roads and show all that, but you can't type in an address. It doesn't know what addresses are then, because to make the file size smaller, it's just really an overlay, where the 24K topo, it knows what roads are, so you can put in an address and it will take you there, because roads are roads. It's not just an image, it's not just an overlay. For motorcycle use, when it comes to the topo side of things, I recommend the 100K topo. And a lot of it is, the 24K topo is nice if you are hiking and stuff, because it's going to show a higher level of detail. And a lot of times it will have hiking trails as hiking trails. So if you're using a Garmin Montana or a backpacking GPS and you're hiking and you say, I want to go to a certain location, it will snap you to hiking trails, or it will route you down those things. For motorcycle use, you end up with a lot more detail, to the point that when I've used 24K topo before, I've actually turned down the detail level, and we'll discuss the detail level shortly, but it's just too much information. You're traveling a lot faster on a motorcycle, and if your topo lines are a little less detailed, it's not going to matter. So I recommend, on the topo side of things, using the 100K topo. And then City Navigator is always great to have. And these 2 screenshots that we're looking at, the one on the right-hand side is 100K topo. The one on the left-hand side is City Navigator, and this is just a chunk of Highway 410 in Washington State. And you can see that having the topo lines, a lot of times, if there's not a lot of roads, it's going to show you a lot more. Even though the topo is showing a little bit higher degree of roads, it's having all those contour lines is going to give you a lot of information, especially if you understand how to read them. And a lot of times, if you're riding a backcountry discovery route in your middle of the woods, you're not going to have a lot of roads. So seeing a ridge line and then looking at that in the real world and seeing it kind of follow along, and you can see the road maybe is halfway up that ridge line is tracing it, you can look at the topography itself and go, we're going that way, and we're probably going to hook up ahead. Where just having a road, you don't really have any reference points. The City Navigator map set, and it's kind of a misnomer, because City Navigator from Garmin does show pretty much every road. It's very rare that I've been on a dirt road that it doesn't show. It's, most time if the road doesn't show them, there's still the grader that made that road parked on that road if I'm up in the woods. So it does show a lot of it. You can totally navigate a backcountry discovery route using City Navigator. It's going to have, odds are, every dirt road that you're on. The other nice thing with City Navigator software, and the reason why I recommend everybody has that just in their unit, even if they're not using it, is it's going to have all sorts of points of interest. So it's going to have gas stations and restaurants and hospitals. And if you have City Navigator enabled, and somebody gets hurt out in the woods, and you can go, where's the nearest hospital, and it'll give you turn-by-turn instructions. It'll say turn left, turn right, even if you're on the dirt roads to get you down to the highway and get out to, the hospital where you can get somebody some help, or you're out there and there's a fire and there's road closures and you're backing out and you just need to find gas. You can go, okay, where's the nearest gas station? Let's top off, regroup, and go from there. Another important thing when it comes to the maps, the way the Garmin hierarchy of maps works is City Navigator always knows more than 100K topo. So you can be somewhere where there's maybe not a road on your screen. You're just, you started overlanding out in the desert. There's nothing on your screen. You just have a black screen. And you have both 100K topo enabled and City Navigator enabled, and you're going to see nothing. As soon as you go into your map settings and you disable City Navigator, so your only map is 100K topo, you're going to get all the topo lines, and if there's any other map data that it has, it's going to show it. So it's an important thing to remember that just because you have both maps enabled, you might not have the most useful map, because the way Garmin stacks the usefulness of maps is City Navigator trumps topo maps. And it might not be showing you anything useful, but since you have it enabled, it assumes that it is the better map. So this is where on all the current series Zumo units, the 395, 396, the 595, 596 Nav 5, Nav 6 BMW units, you have different ride modes. They'll give you on-road, off-road, and motorcycle, and the changes you make to your maps will only live in each one of those things. And on the outdoor units like the Montana and the Oregon and the 60 series, you have different profiles, and you can have these things, different setups in each one. So instead of having to go in and change your map each time you're doing a different thing, on the current generation Zumo and BMW Nav units, there's a little icon on the top with either a car or a bike or a dirt bike wheel, and you can select that and switch between it with a push of a button. With the Montana and the other ones, the outdoor units, you can quickly change profiles, so you can dial in your unit for your application. And the big thing is just make sure you're using the right map. And even though you can do a backcountry discovery route with City Navigator, generally I'll have City Navigator 100K topo both installed in my unit, and when I get down and start getting on the dirt, I'll switch over to Topo, because having the contour lines is so often more useful to me than having a black screen with one road. I'll still have that one road, I'll still see my track, but seeing the contour of the land is really easy to see the curves on the map and then relate it to what you're seeing in the real world, and gleaning what's happening a mile or 2 miles or half a mile or 20 miles away. So use the best map you can for your application, but just remember, if you have City Navigator and Topo both enabled, you're probably not going to see the topo until you disable City Navigator. And that's why having the different ride modes or different profiles is nice, because you can have your setting for when you're off-road and your setting when you're on-road, and instead of having to make changes in menus, you can just do a broad change and go, I'm now off-road, I'm in my off-road mode, which is always going to be north up in Topo Maps or something like that. Next one is map detail, and the two pictures here in some ways are a bad representation, in some ways a great representation. The one on the left is normal detail level, and the one on the right is high detail. And depending on your unit, you have 3 to 5 different detail levels. And on the outdoor units like the Montana, you can kind of fine-tune it where you can have your detail level for topographic things or points of interest or road names or roads. On the Zumos, you kind of just have one volume knob. So instead of, if you think of it as stereo, on the Zumos, you just have volume. On the outdoor units like the Montana, you have kind of like a full deck of knobs where you can adjust depending on what it is. You have a full equalizer. Generally speaking, with the current units, I normally leave it on normal, and here you can see you went to high detail and didn't make a difference. And the only time I've really used this has been if I'm running City Navigator, I'm kind of out in the middle of nowhere, I'm out in the woods, and if you go to higher detail, sometimes you'll see the little side roads sooner at a further out zoom level, so you can get a bigger picture. I've also used it if I'm running 24K Topo. I'm especially on the East Coast, forest, and there's just a ton of parking areas and hiking trails and stuff, and the screen can get overwhelmed with information that you're just caring about the roads and some topo lines maybe, and you just have so much information that you got to dial it back. But generally speaking, the normal level is fine in a large degree, and I think where the Zumo series units have kind of gotten away from a lot of the adjustability on it. This is a carryover from the processors were a lot slower, whereas if you went high detail, they got really choppy. And 10 years ago, those units, if you went super high detail and you were traveling at speed, they were not very smooth. These days, I'd say generally I leave it at normal. If you crank it up to high because you want more detail, you probably won't see much of a difference. The big thing is to know it exists. So if you find your screen really cluttered with too much information, you can go into your settings, you can turn it down, or if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you just don't have any information, you can try turning it up, and chances are maybe you'll see some spur roads a little bit sooner. So not one that you really need to mess with. 8, 10 years ago, it was something that you ended up using more just depending on how much information you had and trying to keep the GPS running smoothly, but it's something that's you should know exists, but you're probably not going to need to adjust. The next one is going to be icon or vehicle, and again, that one kind of depends on the unit itself. And when you're in 3D mode or automotive mode, all the icons seem to work really well because it's kind of prominent in front and center, and they look really cool. And I know from Garmin you can download Star Wars ones and Simpsons ones, and they've done all sorts of things with different TV shows and movies. But it really comes down, you need something that's going to show up well. And in the bottom left-hand corner, we have the dirt bike that a lot of people will use because it sounds cool. I think the official name is Dirt Digger. But when you look at it from a top-down view, that's really kind of hard to see, and it's kind of hard to see which direction it's heading. Like I said, 3D mode, you're always going up. It's kind of front and center. It looks cool, but it doesn't really work too well in a top-down view. And we go to the bottom right, and we got the pickup truck, and that's kind of the same thing. It kind of blends in a little bit. It doesn't really pop. We go up top, we got the crow, and that one's a little bit better. It has a nice highlight around it, kind of a cheeky thing on the way the crow flies. And then the top left is the one I use most of the time, and that's the 3D arrow. And it's old, it's from the 80s, it looks like a terrible 80s video game, but it's really easy to see what direction it's pointing, what direction it's going. And there's a whole bunch of preset ones, and as I said, you can download more. I think at some point you can even customize them, but pick something that's going to show up well. And since, if I'm on my Montana, I do have an automotive profile, and a lot of times I do use the truck in that one, and some of it is when I turn on the unit, if I haven't used it in a little while, and I'm wondering why I'm in 3D mode and everything is wrong, it's a reminder that, okay, this is my car profile, this is the one I use in the truck. So it can be useful there if you have a profile you're always using in 3D mode and you have a different one, it gives you that visual cue. But generally for navigating with tracks, I use the 3D arrow because it is the easiest to see. It works really, really well. There's a reason why they came up with it. They haven't really changed it. It's boring, but there you have it. I mean, if you want to mess with your buddies, there is normally on the Zumo units a pink scooter, and you go into the settings and you change it, and they'll learn real quick how to fix that. I've seen that. So there's a lot of them, but 3D arrow is my go-to for navigating with tracks. And if you're having a hard time following your little dirt bike, try that one. It's going to get a lot easier. Now we have zoom level. So we have 4 different zoom levels here. This is all Montana screen grabs from the exact same location. So we have 300 foot, 500 foot, 800 foot, and 0.2 of a mile scale. And in the bottom right-hand corner of each screen, you can see the little scale thing. So if you're out there in the woods, you can kind of lay your finger on top of it and then measure out distance if you need to. And these are the 4 scales that I generally use. And depending, and a lot of it is going to be dependent on your speed that you're traveling. So 300-foot scale, if I'm riding single track, that's probably I might be zoomed into that. You're going to have a lot more detail. You're going a lot slower. You can't see as far, but you're going to have more detail. The 500 foot and the 800 foot scale are a lot of times, if I'm running, at the Touratech rally doing the rides or backcountry discovery routes, a lot of times the scale I'm going to be in, and it's a nice balance between seeing some distance and still having the detail. Where with these touchscreen GPSs, it's hard to hit the zoom button without missing, and then not actually zooming it and dragging your screen or going to a menu or something like that. So I've gotten in the habit with the Garmin Montana and any of the touchscreen GPSs I use to kind of find a scale that is going to work. And then if I've just got off the highway and then I know I'm going to do some really tight stuff, maybe I'll press plus one, zoom in a little bit or zoom out one, something like that. But generally, I'm not making on the fly zoom changes. And at first, it was a little bit weird, but you get used to it. And the 500 to 800 foot scale works really well for that because the GPS is by default. You're still going to see a lot of the spur roads. You're going to see a lot of the detail, and you can still see further enough down the road, especially with the speeds you're traveling off road and even general back roads and things like that. 2/10 of a mile scale, I've started to use more, and some of it just depends on what you're doing, how fast you're going, and then the quality of your tracks as well. So in 2018, KTM did their Ultimate Race Qualifier, and they were trying to simulate a more roadbook conditions using GPSs. So a 200-mile GPS track had maybe a couple hundred points on it. So the line a lot of times went off the road, and it wasn't like following a Touratech rally track or a BDR track where it was super accurate. They were intentionally very inaccurate to make you have to look miles ahead and make sure you're going where you're going. And that's when I spent a lot of time at 2/10 of a mile because I needed to see, a mile down the road which direction I was heading. So when I came up in an intersection, it looked like I was going left and I was actually needed to go right. I could make that decision where if I was zoomed in at 300 foot, I wouldn't have that information. So if you're going fast and maybe you're doing more road type stuff, it's nice when you see further ahead. Or if you're using really low quality tracks that aren't following the roads in the pass very well, it's good because it gives you a bigger picture. But it can be a little bit harder to navigate. And with any of these zoom levels, one of the things you do have to keep in mind is your icon. You are at the middle of your icon. So especially when you're zoomed out further, if you're at 2/10 of a mile and your icon is almost half that size, your icon is a tenth of a mile big. It's at the middle of that.